Jeff Walz is the latest coach to go on a rant about the problems with this generation of athletes, and specifically how this generation of athletes doesn't care about losing. What's never really said, and what I would ask is, how is one supposed to react to a loss? Because to me, how people react to a loss is different amongst more or less every individual, and it isn't a generational thing, it's an individual thing. And these rants have been going on for as long as I've been in coaching. In my second year as a college assistant coach, I remember the head coach locking us in the office the day after a game and just complaining for 2 hours about how these players don't care enough. As soon as the game ends, they're smiling in the locker room, they're texting their friends, or calling their friends. I don't even know if they had text messages back then. And everything like that. All they care about is the movie they're going to watch in the car on the ride home. Whatever it is that signals that for some reason they don't care enough about winning. And so this is not a new thing. It has nothing to do with this generation of athletes. I think it just has to do with coach perceptions. Coaches, by their very nature, have invested their livelihood into coaching and into the sport that they coach. Their family's future depends on them winning that game. Their self-worth a lot of time depends on how they coach, because their identity is as a coach, and if so your team is playing poorly, that's a reflection on the coach, and therefore because that's where your self-identity is, then therefore it's a reflection of you as a person, and that becomes a dangerous path to go down, but it's one that a lot of coaches are on. They are consumed by their job and by their team, and their self-worth and self-identity aren't differentiated from the record of their team. And so if their team's record is poor, if they're in a losing streak or something like that, it reflects poorly on them, and a lot of times creates stress that they may not be able to handle because of that, their self-identity. It's so wrapped up in the team's record or the team's performance on the court. But again, that's not a new thing. That goes back as long as I've been in coaching. I've heard the same things, seen the same things with coaches. But one of the specific things that Walz complained about was consolation brackets, or what he termed going into the friendship bracket. If you lose a game, you go into the consolation bracket and you keep playing. And he said this is a new thing. Well, it's not. It's every league I ever played in, or every tournament I ever played in when I was a child, we had a consolation bracket. It has to do with money. It has nothing to do with protecting self-esteem. And every college tournament that you go to has the same thing until the postseason. If you play in a college tournament, you're guaranteed 2 or 3 games. That's how they're able to get you to come to a tournament. A high school tournament, same thing. You're guaranteed 2 or 3 games. That's how they're able to charge more to get teams to come to those games. If they don't guarantee you those extra games, why would you pay that fee instead of just hosting games on your own? And so it's a financial thing. It's a business thing. It's nothing to do with self-esteem. But I went to an AAU Nationals years ago with the girls team, and we went, I think we won one of our first 3 games, so we got placed into the consolation bracket. One of our 3 losses in the bracket play, I believe, was to Elena Della Don. I've never had that 100% confirmed, but I'm pretty sure it was, because she was the same age and she grew up playing with the club that we lost to. So we lost, and we also lost to a team from Texas. Both of those teams finished in the top 5 or 10 in the nation. So we get put into the losers bracket, the consolation bracket, friendship bracket in Jeff Walz terms, and we go on. We end up, winning the consolation bracket. 2 years later, I'm coaching a couple girls who were on that team. So now they're 11 years old, because they were the young ones on that team. And this one girl specifically, who I was close to, her and her family, were in a game, just another meaningless AAU tournament in the middle of February or March. Girl goes up for a layup. She's probably the smallest player on the court. The other team, we're talking about 11-year-olds. The other team had a girl probably close to 6 feet tall, and her elbow came down on the top of my girl's head. And she literally bit through her tongue, was bleeding everywhere. She goes over, her parents, take care of her for a minute. All of a sudden, like 5 minutes later, she's sitting on the bench asking me if I can go into the game. And I was the assistant coach at the time, asking me, put me back in the game. I'm like, no, you're not going back in the game. You just practically cut your tongue off. And then she's like, look, and her parents are over there going, yeah, okay, she can play. She's, the bleeding stopped. She's okay. And she went back in the game. She won us the game because she was the best player on the team. She's probably the best player in the tournament. She also played on a boys' team. Was probably the best player on the boys' team at that time as well. So my point is, she played in a consolation tournament. She obviously cares about winning. She played through, having her tongue practically cut off. And kept playing, wanted to get back in the game and play. So having played in this consolation bracket and winning a trophy, because I think because we won the bracket, we got medals or trophies or something, winning this meaningless medal, it didn't prevent her from wanting to win, a year or two later, or caring about her record. It was what it was. It meant that we got to play more games. Instead of flying all the way to Florida to play 3 games, lose 2 of them, then go home, we got to stay, and we ended up playing 8 or 9 games, however many it took to win, the consolation bracket. So that made a trip to Florida worth it. Otherwise, why would we fly to Florida for the potential that we'd only play 3 games, and then fly home, be there for 2 or 3 days from California? That doesn't make a lot of sense. So again, it's a business thing. And it has nothing to do with how a player reacts to a loss or how players develop psychologically and then react to losses. When I coached overseas, we would get in a van and be driving home after games, and win or lose, guys would be drinking beer in the van on the drive home. And some would be sleeping, some would be mad, some would be on their phones snapping with their girls, or they'd be watching movies. Every one of them reacted in a different way, and once they left the gym, they pretty much went back to life. We spend so much time as coaches teaching players in the course of a game. If you make a mistake, forget about the mistake, focus on the next play. If you miss a shot, get back on defense. Don't let one mistake become 2 mistakes. But then for some reason after the game, if you want to look at a loss as a mistake, for some reason we don't want them to forget about it. We want them, start crying, carry on, throw things. I don't know what the correct behaviors are after a loss. Again, to me, everybody's going to handle a loss differently. Some are going to show outward signs of emotion and caring. They're going to wear their emotions on their sleeve, to use a typical cliche. Some of them internalize it. Some of them get silent because they're internalizing it and they're frustrated and mad. Some of them are going to yell at teammates because they're frustrated and mad. Some are going to roll their eyes at the coach when the coach tries to say anything because they're frustrated and mad. Some of them might cry. Some of them might laugh as a defense mechanism. I see that too. Players getting yelled at and they kind of laugh because they're embarrassed, and it's a defense mechanism to try to show I don't care that you're yelling at me. But it's insecurity. It's lack of self-esteem, and it's ultimately a defense mechanism. And that doesn't make that person a bad person or a bad player. It's something that you need to learn about a player, and you need to learn how the group reacts to a mistake. As I point out in an article that I wrote about Walz's tirade, several players on his team have won state championships at the high school level. They all come from successful programs. Potentially they don't know how to react to a loss because they've never really lost in their lives. That's why they're at a school like Louisville playing for a top 5 program. If they came from a bad program where they lost all the time, it'd probably be a sign that they're not as good, and they probably wouldn't get to a team like Louisville. Instead, they've all won, high school state championships, AAU championships. They've, their collective records, they've probably won 90% of their games in their lives. That's why they're at Louisville. So they may not know how to react to a loss, not because they were playing in consolation tournaments or they got a participation trophy when they're 12 years old, because they never lost in their lives. And so they've gotten to this point being really, really, really successful, and now they play a tough game and they lose, and they don't know what's the appropriate behavior. And more to the point, the appropriate behavior is never really defined. Like, what should you do when you lose? What is the appropriate behavior? Do coaches want to see players, crying or throwing stuff or carrying on, yelling at teammates? Do they want to see them silent? You know, I mean, I coached with a coach one time who came in after a loss and yelled at the team for 3 hours after a game. That didn't make us any better. It just allowed him to, you know, vent his frustrations. It didn't do anything for the team. The players didn't play any harder or less hard in the next game. They didn't practice any harder or less hard in the next day. It was just 3 hours that were wasted with the coach going off and screaming in the locker room and forcing us to get back, you know, to campus late and players to go to bed late and miss class in the morning. But it didn't do any good. It didn't have an effect on behaviors going forward. We pretty much played the same, you know, the next game and thereafter. But I think that's kind of what some people view as an appropriate behavior by a coach. If you think that your team didn't play well or didn't play hard or whatever the case may be, you go in and you yell and you scream and you yell and you scream and you throw stuff and you break a locker and you make this big point. But does it really have an effect? You know, does it change behaviors? Does it change behaviors positively? And same thing with players. What do we want from players? You know, what is the expectation when a team loses? What do you want? What behaviors should players show so that you know that they really care? Are you looking for tears? Are you looking for screaming? Are you looking for silence? Like, how do you know? And how long does that behavior have to last? Do they have to, you know, stay silent for 10 minutes, for 20 minutes, for an hour? Like if you know, with a lot of colleges where the women play before the men, so you're on the women's team, you lose, you go out, you know, and you're watching the men's team. Do you have to sit in silence the whole time? Are you not allowed to eat dinner, you know, after your game because you're supposed to be mad? You know, what are the appropriate behaviors when you lose a game? You know, last year I wrote an article about Draymond Green and Steph Curry going out to dinner and drinking and stuff the night after they lost in Memphis, the year they won the NBA championship. You know, nobody criticized them. You know, they're pros, they're the best. That's what they felt they needed to do after a loss. So why do we treat college players or high school players differently and expect them to have some unknown behaviors that nobody really specifies what's appropriate for players to do when they lose a game?